My suspicions about the day before the elections, you mean? Or my interpretation of the events? Yeah, I think they're a very weird sequence of events that suggest some kind of a conspiracy to shift the election to the incumbent president and his vice president. This was not a fair election. This was a most unfair election because of the intrusion of these events.
Why is it important for a democratic nation for the president to announce that he was okay? I mean,
because in democracies, leaders owe their political power to voters. They represent the people. They are the foremost, premier representative of the people. And they are supposed to inform the people as prudently and as quickly as possible of danger and threats to security and what actions the president and the government are taking. Now, this was not done at all by the government of Chen Shui-bian and his vice president.
Do you feel he should have gone on television as soon as possible to announce?
Of course. He should have told the people as soon as possible. I've been personally attacked. These are the things that we're taking steps to do to try to catch and apprehend the alleged or the so-called assassinators. We don't know whether this was an inside Taiwan job or fomented from outside. We suspect that there could be a conspiracy involving elements within Taiwan and possibly outside, even in China. Therefore, we put the country on national alert. Therefore, we believe that all voting should be canceled until such and such a time. These are the things that should have been done in a democracy, if Taiwan has the guts to call themselves a democracy. But if you look at the way this whole thing unfolded on Friday, it just doesn't make sense unless there is some sort of plan going on and being enacted to shift the terms of the election over to a much more firmer electoral support of the incumbent president and his vice president. And this is precisely what happened. Why at 3:30 Friday afternoon would these underground radios suddenly begin blaring what they were blaring? Why would these trucks with amplifying machines in them go out and spread these rumors? Why would these rumors continue? Why would the DPP at 5 o'clock say we're going to stop campaigning and then resume campaigning again? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. This is not what a normal democracy would do. This is what an autocratic, pseudo-populist type democracy would do, though. Well, think about it. And I hope you and your colleagues can think about it and in some honest way come to a good interpretation of this events of Friday, March 19th. But they will not be proven in the court of law provided by this government, because in the 1990s, Tung-hui very shrewdly, very astutely, was able to use the power he had in the KMT to pass a series of revised tiao, or amendments to the Constitution. These new amendments allowed the president to have extraordinary authority to pick and to approve people for the Judicial Yuan and people for the Central Election Committee. And before he stepped down in May of year 2000, he had his own cronies in place. Any replacements that continued in those two branches for the next 4 years under Chen Shui-bian were again replaced by Chen Shui-bian's preferred people. And these people are not going in any way to honor the litigation demands of the Blue Alliance. So the whole thing is done. There would be no proper judicial fair review of this whole matter, and the blue camp cannot expect anything, it seems to me, under this kind of arrangement. And not only is this a government that has hand-picked people for it, but this is a government that also can control the media now in exactly the same way the KMT used to control it, even more so now. More so because I think they have developed the skills to do that the KMT had not even thought of. And one of the ways that this is done is basically to control the media through the kind of advertising funding that the media can get. And the government has been able to effectively control that so that the major dailies, if they don't have their own sources of income, they're in deep trouble. So anyway, this is a democracy that's extremely flawed. Just because it has regular voting doesn't simply mean that the democratic process in any way or form is maintained. And now what the government apparently wants to do in order to change the Constitution is to do it through referendum. And there is nothing in the current Constitution that allows that. And yet this government is proposing to do that. So, where is the rule abidance way to do these things? The only way you can change the Constitution now is to have it done through the legislative yuan. But it has to be by a 2/3 vote of the legislative yuan. And clearly the opposition knows that in this upcoming December election for the legislative yuan, they're not going to get a 2/3 support from the DPP. That's not going to happen. And this president is hell-bent to change the Constitution, so now he can only do it not through the legal procedures of the legislative yuan, he's going to do it through gongto, or referendum. Again, this is breaking the law, creating your own law as a dictator. So, Taiwan democracy has really, really taken a big step backward. And I would say that the beginning of this whole process began to take place in 1996 when Tung-hui was elected. You'll remember that 2 years within his election period, he conducted something called the Guofahui. And in that, he attempted to strong-arm a series of approved agreements between the parties as to how cross-straits relations would be managed, as to how the country would be, its economy would be reconstructed and on and on. And if you study carefully what Tung-hui did in his 4 years, he set the stage for how later presidents elected just barely by unusual happenings, unusual events, would be able to use the same autocratic means that this president is attempting to use. So all I can say is that I observe Taiwan democracy slipping backward into almost like into the early days of when the KMT used to rig elections, as they did in the 1950s and 60s. The media depends upon advertising. They don't get enough money through normal subscriptions to pay for their full costs. Now, the government knows generally who's providing funds for advertising. And they can put pressure on those suppliers of those funds to not do that. There's various ways they can do that. And clearly, every time I go to Taiwan in the last 4 years, I hear about this process of this slow throttling of the Taiwan press. So this is not a this is you know this is not a this is a government basically trying to push a certain agenda. It wants to reform the Constitution and push the rules basically more and more toward the creation of what I would have to call the Taiwan Republic. This is something that, you know, deserves to be studied by academics and but there's no doubt that if we went back and looked very carefully at the way the media has evolved, we would see what kind of people have been elected to the judicial yuan and what kind of people have been elected to the Central Election Commission. And I can assure you that these are people close and sympathetic to the current government. And then you have to ask yourself this problem. Why was it in the 1990s, particularly after 1994 and 95, that we begin to see the practice of heijin so widespread in the legislative yuan and in certain counties like Pingtung County and elsewhere in Taiwan? Why is it that only about 6-7 years after the death of Jiang Jingguo, that corruption begins to rear its mighty head in Taiwan? Because I'll tell you frankly, the level of corruption under Chiang Kai-shek and Jiang Jingguo was very, very minimal. Officials were not allowed in the Taiwan government or in the Republic of China government to have close associations with big corporations and well-known, influential, famous business persons. If they were found out in any way or reported to these two presidents, Jiang father and Jiang Jr., they were dealt with pretty quickly. This was the so-called informal way by which the government was kept relatively clean. Now, there were a few scandals. There was the Shixin scandal in the late 80s when Jiang Jingguo was still alive. And that was cleaned up quickly. But that was a rare case, very unusual. But why is it that once Lee Teng-hui becomes president, consolidates his power in the KMT Central Committee and Standing Committee, and finally gets rid of a lot of the old mainland type KMT officials, why is it that corruption suddenly becomes a really big problem in Taiwan? And I have to say it simply owes much to Lee Teng-hui's style of governance. He begins to pocket money from a lot of cronies. It's even rumored that he got a lump of money from the sale of French Mirages to the ROC government. And on you hear public rumors about his accumulation of wealth and about his friends in the legislative yuan that are also mixed up with construction industries and getting kickbacks for providing lucrative contracts to build certain projects for the public. And Chen Shui-bian himself has been under a dark cloud in the last few years for similar kinds of behavior. So I tell you, as Kuomintang rule declined, there's a fairly direct correlation with the rise of corruption from the mid-90s until the present. And I don't see it ending. And let me say one final thing. In the early 1990s, when Lian Zhan was vice president and Lee Teng-hui was president, there was a concerted attempt to restructure the Taiwan economy and make its services a modernized new sector that would be number one in East Asia. This services sector was supposed to represent a more liberalized banking system. It was to provide insurance. It was to provide port facilities, a whole variety of things. It was to open up for foreign investment to come in and build their own services and mix with those of the private sector of the Taiwanese entrepreneurs. This was in line with the general KMT pattern of infant industry promotion and trying to restructure Taiwan's economy nearly every decade. And you can look back on the 50s and 60s and come down to the 1990s, and you can see that restructuring of the economy went on all the time by the ministries of finance and the ministries of economic affairs. But somehow, by the mid-1990s, when Lee Teng-hui is elected, this restructuring into a new services center starts to fall apart. It doesn't get funded. It doesn't get the attention of government. It doesn't get the promotion by various officials from the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Economic Affairs. And until today, there's been no significant restructuring of Taiwan's services industries. All of this happened under Lee Teng-hui's presidency. While he was so busy restructuring the Constitution, basically, to make it a very powerful presidential authoritarian democracy, he let these things around him get worse and worse. And I haven't seen any of this effort to restructure the service industries under the current presidential regime. This is the problem that deserves far more study than I think anybody has been able to give it. You'd have to look at the cases. What happened to the cases? How many were shelved? How many were actually concluded and penalties brought to bear on actual offenders? But clearly, corruption is being discussed and mentioned all the time. It is not. I see no evidence that it's gotten very much better under the presidency of the last 4 years, and I see and it got very much worse beginning around 1993-94 until Lee Teng-hui stepped down in the year 2000. So to make the comparison you suggest, I'm not competent to do it. But clearly, corruption is still a serious problem. Much more so than it was in the Jiang Jingguo and Chiang Kai-shek era. That I can safely say.